Hi guys, it's Kelly Lativola here, and I am so excited to be guest designing for Pink and Main today. I'm going to be using a couple of new sets from their June 2017 release, the Seize the Day and the Congrats. I showed the Congrats dies, but I didn't end up using them. So I have two pieces of Canson watercolor cardstock here, and we're going to do Distress Oxide backgrounds two different ways. So I picked out a couple of colors that I felt like would match my little ocean characters. I'm working on my Ranger craft mat. And for the first background that I'm going to do, it's going to be on the larger piece of cardstock, and I'm putting down, just using the side of the ink pad, just a very minimal color, because I'm going to dip this one time and be done with it. So I'm going to spray it down with some clean water until I see little bubbles forming, and then I'm just going to push it down. The whole idea was I didn't want the background to be huge. I just wanted to be able to put it on my piece, pick it up, and be done with it. So with the faded jeans, it did start to get a little muddy in the corner there. So I just kind of sopped up some of the pigment with just a paper towel. And then I'm going to go ahead and heat set it. And then once I was done with this part, I didn't add any more color to it. I was actually really happy with the way it came out. So I am going to use a paintbrush just to flick some water, because it's like this massive color. And so I wanted to break it up a little bit to give it a little bit more interest. So I put the clean clear water on there and then just blotted it off. You can see those cool little water droplets. And then I'm going to go right into the next background. For this one, I'm putting down substantially more color because I'm going to dip it several times. So I just kind of put my colors down in a square pattern. You can put them down however you want. Going to do the same thing with the clean water, spray them till I see a couple little droplets, and then I'm going to dip the smaller piece in. So I'm going to dip it in once, push it down, and then pick it up and dry it. So with this one, you want to be drying in between all of the steps, because oxides are really cool. They're made with partial pigments, so that means they'll lay on top of each other. So you can put this light green, this cracked pistachio on top of the faded jeans and still be able to see the green. So I just kept dipping it and drying it in between until I was happy with the way that the background looked. There isn't any kind of rhyme or reason to how I did what I did. And you can come up with a ton of different backgrounds this way, which is super cool. So one a little bit more controlled, one a little bit less controlled. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the water droplets, just to break up some of that color, especially at the top where the wilted violet is. It's very, very solid. So I wanted to make sure that I got a little bit of variation up there. And the longer you let these droplets sit, the more pigment's going to come up. So you can, based on your own discretion. Here, I'm done. So my backgrounds are completely dry. I have these wonky rectangles from Simon Says Stamp. Now, when you hear the word wonky, it makes you think that they're going to be off center or they'll be misshapen. They're not. They're perfectly shaped rectangles, but there's a detail that it adds, a stitching detail on the inside that is kind of haphazard and is super cool. My game plan was to make you 2 cards, but then I realized with the smaller one, if I use the smallest rectangle, I could actually make 3 cards. So that's what I ended up doing. My big shot does not fit on camera, so I'm going to take that over there and cut them out, bring them back. So now everything is cut out as far as the background. And then this is how I approach the cards, especially when I'm making multiple cards. I lay them all out how I want them to be, whatever their orientation is. And then I start picking out my stamps and laying them out so I will know what I want to stamp for my Copic coloring. So this is my mini Misty. I have all my stamps laid in there. I've stamped them far enough away that I'll be able to die cut them. I'm going to stamp them in intense black ink from Simon Says Stamp because it's Copic safe, and I'm going to be doing Copic coloring. So let me just take a minute here before we hop right into the Copic coloring to let you know video gremlins have eaten some of my footage. It happens. It makes me sad when it happens, but it happened. So I'm going to show you, obviously I showed you the background and I'll show you the Copic coloring, but the assembly of the card, basically after I stamped the first sentiment, is gone. Disappeared, vanished. And I really feel, I hate watching videos like that because I feel like, I don't know, I got gypped. I got gypped out of seeing how the card was put together, which is why if you watch my channel, you know I always show you the whole thing. So there's no question about where I did what or where what came in. So I did add some extra photos at the end of the video, and I will kind of just explain what I did when we get there, but my apologies, the gremlins got me again. They won again. So for this shading on the whale, I am shading as if my light source is in the top right corner. So the darkest areas are going to be to the left-hand side. The only thing that I did not color with the lightest color is the fin in the back, because that's behind his body, so that would be darker. So I used my second darkest color for that. I wanted to make sure that I had some shading around the fin that's in the front to set that apart from his body. And then also on his tail, even though it is tucked up underneath his body, there would be some highlight on the right-hand side where the light was getting in. And then for this one, I'm not even really using like flicking motions. I'm just kind of using the side of my marker to get down as much pigment as I can. Just because it was really kind of just simple shading. The last thing that I did was just go over his body with the lightest color from the outside in. That fin in the front felt like it didn't have enough shading, so I went in with the B97 and just added a little line on the bottom and then just blended that back out. It felt like it fit much better after that. For the shading underneath his belly, I'm going to be using some cool grays. We want it to look white, but obviously it's the underside of his belly, so there should be some shading. I filled the whole thing in with a C1 and then added a C3 on the outside edges, and then especially where that tail is, that's going to be the darkest. So I added just a little bit of C5 there and underneath his front fin, and then I'm just going to go back through and blend everything out. I didn't cover the entire thing in C1 again because I wanted there to be just one layer. So for this, I filled in the entire octopus, but I did speed it up because I'm going to be die cutting these out, and nothing will show you if that you are a sloppy colorist faster than trying to stay in the lines for them white outlines on them die cuts. What? I had no idea I was such a sloppy colorist, whatever. I can't stay in lines, folks. I can't do it. So I did speed it up a little bit because it was excruciatingly slow filling in that base color. So again, I'm shading as if the light source was in the top right hand corner. And then one of the things that anytime you have a stamp, whether it's a flower, an octopus, a whatever, that you have multiple layers of things. So this octopus clearly has 8 legs. So they're all kind of laying on top of each other. Anytime you have something like that, the contrast, your darkest shadows, and the highlights are going to be the only thing that is going to keep it from just looking just all one shade with no dimension. So when you're coloring these things, I'm being very careful to leave a large highlight in a lot of areas. Now, as I go back through, because I color everything twice, I go from lightest to darkest, darkest back out to lightest. I can do that. I just find that that's easier for me. I get better blending that way, and I have better control over where my color goes. If you don't, just make sure when you're doing it the one time through that you're really, really being cognizant and leaving those highlights. You can always add darker shadows. You cannot, well, that's not true. Sometimes you can save it with a colorless blender. I'm not going to lie to you. But most of the time you cannot get that bright highlight back. So I am adding in my shadows, especially the legs that are in the back are going to get the deepest, darkest color. And then I also added a little bit of the darker color to his face where the legs did not lay on the body. So where they were just kind of out, I did add some darker areas just because I wanted to play up the dimension in those little tentacles, the way that they curl and the way that they move. Here, where you have 2 dark areas, because the shadows are on the left and then there's a leg behind it, I did not add any of the darkest shading to the leg that was on top because I want there to be that segregation. And you can tell just by looking at it now, even though we haven't blended anything out, that you can start to see the dimension. So once I have the darkest color down, I'm going to go back in and start blending everything together a little more thoroughly. I did have some bleeding, meaning that my ink bled outside of my stamped lines. No big shock here, because I learned that I'm a very sloppy colorer. If that happens to you, like it happened to me, because these are small areas and we're putting down a lot of color, just go in with your colorless blender and clean that up. When you're using a colorless blender, you want to make sure that you're pushing the pigment back in toward the lines. So, and make sure you're leaving time for it to dry in between. Don't just keep saturating the area. Let the colorless blender dry, then go back in again. That's usually the best way to get it to pick up. Purples aren't too bad. Reds are a nightmare. I mean, oh my, just a nightmare. So if you're coloring with reds, be very, very careful. So I'm done with the octopus, except for Michelle has drawn these so that they have a little spot on their cheek, like a little blush spot. So I wanted to go back in and highlight that. I just picked an R20 because Copics are transparent. I can do that. I can put the lighter color over the darkest color and it'll push the darker pigment out. For this shell, I decided to go back in with the cool grays that I used on the whale. Now these cards are not, these items are not going on the same card, so it doesn't really matter, but I have a weird thing where everything has to be like super matchy. I don't know, I got problems. So here I'm adding the shading where you can see where the areas would be rounded. So I'm just highlighting those on the bottom and then a little bit of some rounded lines on the top. For the inside of the shell, typically these are a more coral color. So I picked some, well, they're not really red, they're not really coral-ish, but they're like a light peach. And then I felt like the shell needed to be a little bit warmer. In real life, they're more of like that peachy color than they are a stark white. So I used an E99 to just draw in some dots, and then I'm going to go back in with the YR00 and just take that to the darkest points so that it does have a little bit more warmth. The little starfish, I love this little starfish. I love this little starfish because it's drawn very differently. The little starfish is not drawn so that it lays flat. The little starfish is drawn so that you can see his sides. How many times do you think I can say the little starfish? Anyway, so for his shading, I am doing from the center out. I'm making the darkest area in the center so that it looks like it is set in. And then I'm also using the darkest color to kind of hit those little lines where the sides are. And then I'll blend them out with the next lightest color. I'm going to go back over the areas that I've already previously colored. And then make sure when I go back in with my lightest color, I'm not really going over the center. I'm just hitting the outside edges. For my turtle, I wanted to match the colors that were in the card. I told you I have a matching problem, folks. I really do. It's a serious, it's a problem. But I didn't really have any blue-greens that I felt were going to match the cracked pistachio. They were all kind of too blue. So what I ended up doing was picking 2 BGs and then 2 Gs. And I picked Gs that were on the bluer side, but thankfully they were green enough that it would make sense for the backgrounds that I had previously made. So we're still coloring as if the light source is in the top right-hand corner. So the highlight's going to be on the little tip of his head, on the tops of his fins. I decided for his shell I was going to go ahead and color in the areas darker and leave the spaces in between lighter. I colored in the whole side of his shell there because this is on the opposite side from our light source, so it would be darker. He would have a little shadow behind his head, and then he would also have a little shadow where his fins were coming out from underneath the shell, along the bottom edge of his face. Even though these 2 fins are on the light side, there would still be some shadows where they were coming out from underneath his body. I opted to do some stippling on the areas, the darker areas of his shell. This is just to give him a little bit of texture, because even though with sea turtles, their shell is mostly smooth, it doesn't appear to be that way. So for the darkest color, I'm just really adding little teeny tiny lines of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the stippling, but I'm not going to take it all the way up. I'm not going to take it all the way to the light side. I'm just going to do the edges of the ones that are on that side. And again, we're going to go blend out. This time I skipped the GO5 because it just wasn't necessary. I really wanted that blue-green color to shine, and I didn't feel like I needed the GO5 to blend out the other colors. I'm going to go back over the stippling with the same color, even though this is my base color. Because Copics are transparent, they will lift color as well, so it doesn't ever, if you want some variation, it doesn't ever hurt to go back over with your lightest color, which I will do here as well, just adding the little dots of stippling to get some variation in that color. So one of the things, especially with such a simple design, and you saw the cards laid out there, details are really important if you're going to be a clean and simple card maker, because it's what is going to give your card a little bit of wow factor. So I'm using a white gel pen to add some highlights to the characters that I've already colored. I also filled in the little dots on the starfish that are already drawn there, and I added some dots to the turtle to add more texture. If you've never seen my videos before, I really love a bold black outline, so I outline all of my images. That's just me. It's not necessary. I just feel like it makes my colors pop. If you're going to do this step, you want to do it before you do the die cutting. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing little dies all around your desk trying to outline them, and I've done it, and it's not fun. So I'm going to go ahead and put my dies in place. Like I said, my big shot is off camera, so I cannot show that to you. But I went ahead and ran them through there, and then here is where I'm going to stamp this, and then basically we're going to be done. So I picked black ink from Simon Says Stamp. It's a nice crisp black ink to do the sentiment stamping. And the way that I do my sentiments is I kind of lay out where I want my characters to be and then go ahead and stamp my sentiment. The reason that I didn't attach my characters first is because they popped them up on foam tape. I also popped up all of the backgrounds on some white fun foam, and then to tie everything together to fill in those gaps, I added some clear droplets. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope that you learned a little bit of something, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.